Imagine you have a secret key that opens every door in a giant, golden castle. This key doesn't just open doors, it tells the whole world exactly who you are. It says you are special. It says you belong to a story that started hundreds and hundreds of years ago. Now imagine that one day you wake up and the key is gone. You look in your pockets, but they are empty. You look at the big, heavy doors of the castle, and they are all locked. You shout for help, but the people inside the castle stay very, very quiet. They aren't being mean, and they aren't even arguing with you. They are just acting like you aren't there. This is a story about a very famous family and a very old rulebook. It is a story about two children, Archie and Lilibet, who were born into a world of kings and queens, only to find out that the rules of the kingdom might have a different plan for them. Today, we are going to look inside the secret folders of Buckingham Palace to see how a few old words on a piece of paper changed the lives of a prince's children forever. It is a mystery about names, rules, and the power of staying silent. For a very long time, the big, beautiful building called Buckingham Palace stayed very quiet. It was like they were wearing headphones and couldn't hear anything people were saying about them. People were talking a lot about Prince Harry and his wife, Meghan. They were talking about their children, Archie and Lilibet. But the palace just sat there, tall and still, like a giant stone statue. Then, all of a sudden, things changed. People who work inside the palace started whispering that some very important papers were finally ready. These were not just notes or ideas. They were not maybe or we will see. They were final orders. These orders were like the final grade at the end of a school year. They would change the lives of Archie and Lilibet forever. These two kids never asked to be in a big fight. They just wanted to be kids. But the papers said something very simple and very harsh. It said that their special royal names and titles were gone. They weren't just put on a shelf for later. They were gone. When those words were written down, everyone finally understood why the palace had been so quiet. They weren't ignoring Harry and Meghan. They were just waiting. They were being very patient and calm. They knew that the rulebook was stronger than anything anyone could say on TV or in a book. To understand why the royal family made such a cold and final choice, we have to look at a very old, dusty book. This book was written a long, long time before Harry or Meghan were even born. It was even written before their parents were born. It is a book of rules that has controlled the royal family for over 100 years. The year was 1917. Back then, the whole world was in a big, scary war. Empires were falling apart, and kings in other countries were losing their crowns. The King of England at that time was named George V. He wanted to make sure his family stayed safe, and that everyone knew exactly who was a real royal and who was not. He didn't want any confusion or people pretending to be part of the family. So King George V did something very new. He wrote down a set of laws. He didn't just tell them as a story. He made them official rules. He called this document the Letters Patent. For over 100 years, these rules were the most important thing for every royal baby. Inside this old paper, there were 3 very strict rules that a child had to follow to be called a prince or a princess. Rule number 1 was about blood. The child had to be part of the real royal family tree. The king wanted to be sure that only people with the right heritage were in the line for the throne. Rule number 2 was about the record. When a baby was born, it couldn't just be a post on the internet or a story in a newspaper. The baby's birth had to be officially written down by the royal family's own workers in their own special books. Rule number 3 was about the church. The child had to be connected to the Church of England through a special ceremony called a christening or a baptism. This wasn't something you could choose to do or not do if you wanted to be a royal. It was a legal step, like getting a passport. These rules were very sharp and they never changed. They were built to keep the family organized. For many, many years, every single royal baby followed these rules perfectly. There were no shortcuts. There were no secrets. Everything was done exactly the way the king had written it down in 1917. That was true until a little boy named Archie was born, and the very first problem started to show up. Archie was born in 2019. It should have been a very happy day with lots of smiles and pictures. At first, it did look like that, but deep inside the legal papers, something strange was happening. Usually, a birth certificate is a paper that stays the same forever. You don't change it like you change your clothes. On Archie's first paper, it listed his mother's name as Rachel Meghan Markle. That was her normal name, and everything seemed fine. But then, the paper was changed quietly. No one really explained why. Meghan's name was taken off, and instead it said Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Sussex. This was very weird. Birth certificates are not like school essays where you can erase a word and fix it later. They are supposed to be permanent records. When the palace saw this change, they got very worried. Meghan said the palace told her to change it. The palace people said Meghan was the one who wanted to change it. They both pointed fingers at each other. But the most important thing was that the royal record had been changed. Once a record has a mistake or a mystery on it, it's like a tiny crack in a glass window. That crack starts to grow and spread until the whole window might break. By the time Archie's sister, Lilibet, was born in 2021, things were even more complicated. The palace had learned that being quiet was a very powerful way to send a message. When Lilibet was born, everyone expected the usual royal celebration. Usually there are special royal doctors and a big official sign put up on a gold stand outside the palace, but none of that happened for Lilibet. Instead, the news of her birth came from California, which is thousands of miles away from London. It was a nice, friendly message from Harry and Meghan. It looked perfect for a normal family, but something was missing. The crown was missing. There was no official royal stamp. There was no formal paper from the palace saying she was part of the royal list. No one from the official royal staff was there to see her be born. To the people who study the rules, this was a giant signal. It was the palace's way of saying, "We are not claiming this baby as part of our official royal record." For hundreds of years, royal births were like big, important ceremonies for history. Every detail mattered, like who the doctor was and where it happened. These steps told the world that the baby belonged to the history of England. But with Lilibet, none of those steps happened. To a regular person, it just looked like a baby born in a different country. But to the palace, it was a huge deal. It meant she was the first royal grandchild in a very long time to be born outside of the official royal circle. If the birth was a problem, the next thing that happened made things even worse. A few months later, Meghan said that Lilibet had been baptized in California. She talked about how happy the day was and how much it meant to their family. But inside the cold stone walls of the palace in England, the feeling was not happy at all. For a royal child, a baptism is not just a family party. It is a legal requirement from that old 1917 rulebook. It is the moment when the child is officially joined to the Church of England and the Crown. It is a legal marker just like a birth certificate. However, people who look at the church records say that Lilibet's baptism was never put into the official books of the Church of England. To Harry and Meghan, it was a beautiful day. To the royal family, it was a ceremony that didn't officially exist. This is not a small problem. It is like trying to build a house without a floor. A child who is not in the official church record is seen as being outside the family list. The people in the palace thought this was a mistake that could not be fixed. They saw it as the parents breaking the rules. Instead of making Lilibet's connection to the king stronger, it made it disappear. She was now stuck between two worlds. She was a loved daughter in America, but she was like a ghost to the royal institution she was born into. While all of this was happening quietly, Harry was starting to feel very sad and worried. When Meghan joined the family, she became part of a global story. But as the rules started to push his children away, Harry did something that surprised everyone. Even though he had told the world he was done with the royal life, he reached back out to them. People say that Harry made phone calls late at night to the palace. These were not fancy speeches for the TV. They were emotional and personal. He was begging. He asked the palace to think again. He pleaded for Archie and Lilibet to be put back into the royal records. He wanted them to have the titles of prince and princess because he believed they deserved them by blood. To Harry, this wasn't about being famous. It was about their history. He thought he could leave the job of being a royal but still keep the special names for his kids. But every time he tried to talk to them, he hit a wall that would not move. One palace worker allegedly told him something very cold. They said, "This is not about feelings. This is about order and the future of the crown." In that moment, Harry realized something that hurt very much. He wasn't just the prince who walked away. He was now the prince whose children were being erased from the family's history books. Once the palace made its final choice, they moved very quickly and very quietly. There were no cameras or big announcements. There was just steady action. According to people who know what happened, the list of things Archie and Lilibet lost was very long. They would have no royal titles. No one would call them prince or princess in any official way. They would have no official jobs in the family. They would get no public honors or medals. Their names were blocked from the legal line of succession, which is the list of who gets to be king or queen next. They would not get any money from the crown to pay for security guards. If they needed protection, their parents would have to pay for it themselves. Most importantly, their names would not be in the permanent royal archives. These are the big, heavy books that last for hundreds of years. In the world of royals, a title is like a key. It opens the doors of history. It proves you are part of a big, long story. Without those keys, a royal child is just a regular person. And that is exactly what the palace's final orders did. They took away everything that tied the children to the famous Windsor family name. They didn't do it to be mean or to get revenge. They did it because of the rules. The monarchy had made its move, and nothing would ever be the same again. In the end, Buckingham Palace never got into a shouting match. They never went on a podcast to argue. They never made a documentary to tell their side of the story. They didn't need to. The royal family has always known that their greatest power is silence. Silence isn't just being quiet. Silence is a plan. It is their way of saying everything without saying a single word. For years, the palace just watched from far away. They watched Meghan build her own brand. They watched Harry try to live in two different worlds at the same time. They watched the interviews and the public speeches, but they never said a word back. They knew something that the rest of the world often forgets. You don't prove you're powerful by making a lot of noise. You prove you're powerful by making a final decision that no one can change. When the time was right, the crown acted like a giant machine that has been running for 1,000 years. It erased the titles. It changed the records. It moved the names out of the way. The message they sent was louder than any book or TV show. The message was, the crown does not bend. It does not change for celebrities or for people who make noise. Once the crown decides you aren't part of the story anymore, you aren't a rebel or a hero. You are just gone from the pages. That is the final message from the palace. It is a very quiet and permanent message. It leaves one last truth for everyone to think about. Archie and Lilibet will grow up being loved and protected by their mom and dad. They will be free to live their lives however they want in America. They can be anything they want to be, but the pages of royal history, the pages that people will read 100 years from now, will not have their names on them. In that world, they won't exist as royalty. The fact that they are missing from those books is the real answer from the palace. The silence is the final word, and once a decision like that is made by the crown, it is made forever. The golden doors are locked, the secret keys are gone, and the big stone palace continues to sit in the London rain, quiet and still, just like it has always been. The story of the two children is a reminder that some things, like old rules and giant kingdoms, don't change just because the world does. Even if you're born a prince, the rules of the house are always stronger than the person living in it. Harry and Meghan chose a new path and they found freedom. But the price of that freedom was the history they left behind. Now, Archie and Lilibet will start their own story, far away from the dusty rulebooks and the silent stone walls of the castle. They might not have the titles of prince or princess, but they have the chance to write a story that is all their own, without anyone else telling them which rules they have to follow. In the end, perhaps being a regular kid is a different kind of magic that is just as good as living in a golden castle. But the silence of the palace will always be there, a quiet reminder of the world they once belonged to. It is a story that shows us that even in a world of modern things, the old ways still have a very powerful voice, even when they don't say anything at all. The end of this chapter is quiet, but it is a silence that will be heard for a very, very long time.